Well, it's over. Hey y'all, it's me, Bussarella Spears, and welcome back to Hot or Rot. And today we'll be reviewing episode 9 of RuPaul's Drag Race All-Stars Season 10, the final episode of the third bracket of the Tournament of All-Stars! Our 6 queens in the purple bracket were challenged to dress like dogs and do improv in the Golden Batchelor, where they're asked to go on double dates with special guest Zane Phillips in an attempt to win his favor. And the runway category was paper dolls, looks made from paper. And y'all, I'm not gonna mince words, but this challenge was rough. Like, it was genuinely hard to watch, as I personally think all of the improv challenges on Drag Race are. They're my least favorite type of challenge. And not only that, but now that it's over, I think I can safely say that this bracket as a whole is kind of turned into a little bit of a disaster, which we'll break down in greater detail at the end of this video. First, we've got a few things to cover in the Drag Race newsosphere, and then we'll go queen by queen to break it all down. First up, we've got an announcement from the legend, the icon, the one, the only Roxxy Andrews, who has said on Twitter that she won't be returning to Drag Race. In response to a user on X who asked Roxxy, "Can you come back for All Stars? You are drag," Roxxy said, "Never. I'm forever grateful for every moment on the show and everything I got. I got the best fans. I loved making television, but my time as a contestant is over." Well, it's over. And seeing this honestly didn't really surprise me because, like, why would Roxxy go back to All Stars? She's been on Drag Race 3 times now and got everything she needed out of it. And her run on All Stars 9 was iconic. And All Stars 9 was everything that she needed from a redemption from the narrative that she was carried through All Stars 2. Plus, as we've seen, the fan base doesn't necessarily love when a queen comes back to All Stars for a 4th time when they've already had a great run on their prior seasons. So yeah, I think Roxxy is totally valid to be looking onwards and upwards for her career. Next up, we got some sadder news. Ilona Verley, a queen from the Canada's Drag Race franchise, was in a near fatal accident this past week, and she's currently raising money for her medical bills on a GoFundMe that I've linked below for you to check out. She's almost at her fundraising goal, and having suffered some pretty severe injuries, I'm sure she'd love all the help she can get. And now let's move into my review of this week's episode, which of course starts off with our opening Most Valuable Queen Points ceremony. So as a quick recap and reminder, there had been some discussion in the workroom in last week's episode between the girls in Alyssa Betty's stage Cooch group wanting to tip the scales and give points to queens who had not already won challenges, like for example Ginger Minj and Daya Betty in the first week, and where Alyssa said directly to Daya's face that nobody in her group would be giving Daya any more points. However, we also had an interesting discussion about the points ceremonies between Alyssa Hunter and Daya Betty in last week's Untucked, which apparently left Daya thinking she was owed Alyssa Hunter's Most Valuable Queen point were she to be in the bottom. Basically, Daya was throwing out hypotheticals about performance track records in All Stars 10 and asked Alyssa who she would give her point to if this happened, if that happened, yada yada, to which Alyssa simply responds that she would give her MBQ point to the queen that was performing the most consistently in the season, which I think appropriately sets the stage for some of the most annoying and eye-rolly drama that we have ever seen in this franchise ever, and which starts off with Daya reminding Alyssa of the very serious conversation they had last week, saying that she deserves Alyssa's point because of her track record, but if that's not how she chooses to vote, that's totally up to you, but it's something I will remember. Which is all pretty crazy stuff to say because Alyssa never said she was gonna give her MVQ point to the queen who was doing the best. She really only ever said she was gonna give it to the queen that she thought was performing consistently. And so this opening MVQ ceremony begins with Daya giving her point to Cynthia because Cynthia was a member of her team and is someone she admires. Cynthia then gives her point to Daya, returning the favor. Alyssa Betty then gives her point to Cynthia Lee Fontaine, which is in line with what she had been talking about in terms of tipping the scales in favor of queens who weren't necessarily getting favored by the judges. And then the ceremony ends in an upset for Daya, with Alyssa also giving her MVQ point to Cynthia, saying she's doing so because she believes Cynthia is performing consistently in the competition and she thought Cynthia should have been in the top 2, and also for her love of her fellow Puerto Rican sister. And this completely sends Daya off the edge of her seat. She says that she's keeping her cool, but internally is effing screaming, and then gets so annoyed when Ginger Minj comes to check on her and ask what's going on, where then Daya repeats back to Ginger this false gaslighting narrative about how Alyssa said she was going to essentially give her point to Daya because she's the best, which never happened. Like, Daya fully just heard what she wanted to hear on that couch in Untucked and ran with it, and God was not gonna let anybody forget it this episode. But we'll circle back on the Daya Betty versus Alyssa Hunter drama and a more complete retelling when we get to Daya's highest section. But going into this challenge, the points now stand as follows after the ceremony. Ginger has 6, Cynthia has 4, Denali 3, Daya 3, and Acid and Alyssa both with just 1. And personally, I've got to acknowledge, I think it was really cool that both Alyssa and Acid essentially gave up their dreams of progressing into the semifinals of this season by helping out their sister Cynthia. Because girl, as we've seen, the judges were not going to be giving Cynthia any wins this season. Anyways, first up, and in the order they hit the runway this week, it's Alyssa Hunter, who in the challenge plays the character of Kachuska, I think is how they pronounced it, the frisky mutt who really gets around. And the thing with Alyssa is, she's coming into this challenge already having in her head that she's not good at improv, because that was the challenge that sent her home on her original season. But unfortunately for her, this improv did not go any better than the first. The one positive I will give on this character though is the visual gag of what she was doing with the litter of puppies attached to her stomach. And like, of the dog looks, hers was one of the coolest. But unfortunately, the visual gag does not do enough to take her anywhere near the top this week. She's basically on a double date with Ginger at an Italian restaurant where they got a plate of spaghetti between them and the special guest. But her conversation with Zane doesn't go anywhere except just kind of weird and off-putting. And I will say, like, sure, Zane wasn't totally ready to play with the craziness that she was bringing to the table here, but also, like, what the hell was he supposed to say to that? So Alyssa was both bizarre and confusing in her character, and also outshined by Ginger, who was sitting across from her. This performance was a rat. And over the runway, she's wearing a paper look inspired by El Vejigante, a traditional mask made from newspapers, which typically, from what I can tell in my Google searches, is almost always in this sort of like dragon or demon dinosaur spirit shape. Of the geometric patterns that she's played with throughout this look, and those soft shades of blue are really pretty. However, I will say I don't know if there was enough contrast in this look because there was so much white in the look that I was losing some of the detail in the stage lighting. And you can see it better when the cameras are close up, but those distance shots, I don't know, I'm kind of losing the shape, I'm losing the silhouette, and it's looking like weirdly piecey and not cohesive, but also like a blob at the same time. Which is all to say, I think this is a really cool piece of art, but I'm not sure it worked as a garment in the way it was executed here on the stage today. So I'm gonna leave this with a warming up. And next up, the reason for the season, it's Ginger Minj, who in the challenge is playing the character of Ginger Minj, a boozy, floozy Saint Bernard who's coming into this week's challenge, I think feeling a little contention from the other girls because they are not necessarily recognizing or supporting her wins. In fact, in the beginning of this episode, Alyssa sat down at the table and straight up said she thought Denali should have won the lip sync. But hey, she is, as we all know at this point, preaching to the choir. So anyways, maybe Ginger really felt like she had something to prove here and cranked her game up, or she just really is this good at improv, I don't know, but her character was an ace in the hole for this challenge. She was so at home, just being an absolute fool in front of Zane and the other dog she was on the date with. She's progressively getting more intoxicated and talking about these strange, weird neurological issues she's having when she drinks too much, like blacking out. And she takes every opportunity she can to make her character the punchline, which is great because we were able to laugh along with and at her character. This type of situation, this type of challenge is where Ginger Minj shines. This was an excellent performance. I'm gonna give it a hat. And over the runway, Ginger is giving us a little bit of a Shakespeare fantasy, serving us a look made of pages that she has hand-typed passages that reference cross-dressing from Shakespeare's plays, which are all paper mache and fashioned into a full-length Elizabethan styled gown, complete with the red hair and pearls like the queen herself. And personally, I thought this look was impressive just from the perspective of the size, the shape, the structure, and also the movement in the gown. The fact that this is all paper is absolutely incredible. I love the Shakespeare bust as a detail on her bust, and overall this is a solid look. I think the color palette maybe could have been a tad more interesting, bringing in some of those darker brown tones that were in that bust into the other parts of it, and maybe adding a few more like extravagant details like the hem of the skirt or something like that just to make it a little flashier. But overall, I would say this was a hot look. This was, though, the look that prompted Michelle Visage to do a PSA to camera telling all of the future queens coming onto Drag Race not to do any more Marie Antoinette looks. Which, like, considering Acid Betty's Marie Antoinette look was also on the stage tonight, I can understand why she did that PSA, but I didn't understand why she did that for Ginger's look, because Elizabethan styles and Marie Antoinette styles are very different. Like, they're from completely different time periods and places. But whatever, I guess. I think the general sentiment she intended to convey was that we have seen a lot of both of these types of looks over the past, you know, how many seasons of Drag Race have we watched at this point? 30, 40, 50? I don't know. And she is tired of seeing them. But I almost feel like we're kind of getting to a point where these looks are so overdone and so cliche that we're circling back around from like, don't do this, until a point of like, it's kind of ironically funny to see them over and over again. I say, let them eat cake. And next up, it's Denali, who in the challenge is playing Danielle, the Spaniel, who is the needy emotional support dog. And Denali approaches this character with a lot of interesting layers, including a thick British accent and a nervous temperament, which like she literally writes on the back of a jacket she's wearing in the opening shot of this challenge, which I didn't understand, especially considering that nervous wasn't actually a part of the character description, which is something the judges definitely do not like this episode. I think in part because Cynthia's character was supposed to be the nervous dog one, and again, Denali's wasn't. And so while I think she was trying to add a more interesting layer to what she was doing, it just wasn't right for what was being asked. Despite maybe misinterpreting how she was supposed to approach this character though, I actually really enjoyed what Denali did with it. The British accent was funny, I like how she rhymed random words, and I found her to be one of the easiest to watch throughout the entire improv challenge. She was also great in the date scene in the hot tub with Daya, where she did flip the nervous into needy, where we could see her like trying to one-up or copy everything that Daya was doing in a desperate beg for Zane's attention. Overall, I'd say this was definitely hot. And over on the runway, Denali's serving his look inspired by Alebrije, a Mexican folk spirit animal, where hers is here represented as a fox with wings wrapping around her body, which is in a gorgeous paper feathered dress. And what I love most about this look is how she achieved the feathers looking so feather-like, despite them being made of paper. I think the color choice on the fox and her dress are also really great and complimentary. Plus, I love how her spirit fox is supposed to represent the fox part of her drag house family name. Denali's looking foxy and hot. And next up is Daya Betty, who in the challenge is playing the character Rudel the Poodle, a purebred poodle who thinks their doo-doo don't stank. And Daya is another queen tonight, like Ginger, who I think smartly planned ahead with some jokes and character details. Like, for example, in the opening shot, she tells Zane she's part of the Paws Vegas premiere dog show. She's bitchy and also that she bites. She also does a great job of leading the conversations in the hot tub date scene with Zane and Denali. She's giving bitchy attitude, she's flirting with Zane, she's winning his favor, and has a great little physical comedy moment where he's scratching her with the brush and, well, she has a good time. My only bone to pick with Daya's character throughout this improv is that it kind of just felt like Daya playing Daya, which I think stood out to me a lot tonight because a lot of the other queens' characters, like Denali and Ginger, who I did enjoy, were so different from who they are as people. Daya was very entertaining and very watchable though, so I'm gonna give her a hot. Over on the runway though, Daya ate the other bitches up for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. This look is sick. Like, it is not just hot, but burning up head to toe. Like, clock the Alexander McQueen style heel, and clock how the entire look is giving armor, armadillo, seashells. It's very like a mythological chimera beast kind of vibe for me, where I'm seeing bird with the feathers and the horns, and lizard creature with the way the scales are moving around her body. Daya looks freaky, weird, and glamorous in the best way possible, and this look is totally hot. But what was not hot about Daya in this week's episode was her insanely one-sided and inane beef with Alyssa Hunter over this frickin' MVQ point. And we already talked about Daya sandwiching the opening MVQ ceremony with this drama, but that wasn't where it ended. She brings this drama up again in the beginning of this episode and the next day after that ceremony, where she again insists that Alyssa promised to give her MVQ point to the queen who is doing the best, who she is insisting is herself, and where Alyssa continues to correct Daya, saying, "I never said that. I said I was gonna give it to the queen who is most consistent." But Daya just keeps going on and talks about how she thinks Alyssa giving her point to Cynthia was hypocritical. And like, I've got to say, as a viewer of the show, this has to be one of the most imaginary, nonsensical, gaslighty fights that has ever happened in the history of Drag Race. Because Daya fully experienced what she wanted to experience in that discussion with Alyssa and like had her own story and version of it and just refuses to believe that anything else happened. But anyways, this instance of Daya bringing this up to Alyssa ends with Alyssa calling her a bitch. But that's not all, because Daya brings it up again in the workroom after the challenge before the runway, where she tells Alyssa that she wasn't true to her words. And where even when Alyssa is asking Daya to stop with this conversation, she keeps going to other people. Other people here being Cynthia, which thankfully Cynthia just kind of shuts the whole thing down by bringing out her chancla and smacking everybody in the room. But that's not all. It comes up again in Untucked this week, where Daya Betty goes on a rant about how that one MVQ point mattered to her so much, and how she implores to Alyssa that she wants her to understand why she's so frustrated because Alyssa just wasn't true to her words. And it honestly at this point just becomes entertaining and camp to watch her beat this dead horse into the mother tucking ground and watch every other queen in the room just kind of look at her like she's batshit crazy, because she was acting batshit crazy. And like, I'll give her the benefit of the doubt here and assume she was just desperately wanting to go into the semifinals, but like, That one point did not and does not matter. And I don't know why she was so insistent on trying to make Alyssa apologize here in Untucked and was saying like, oh, I'll forgive you for everything if you just give me your point this week. Who cares? And after seeing this play out time and time again this episode, I will also say there is a possibility that the production team was prompting Daya to bring this up to give storyline and drama to the episode. It's totally possible that Daya was assuming they weren't going to use every instance of her doing that, but they did, and it kind of made her look a little unhinged. Anyways, next up, it's Acid Betty, who in the challenge is playing the character of .com, the Doberman Dom. And there are a lot of buzzwords around this character that I can't speak on this Christian channel because it will get my video demonetized, but I will say I wasn't totally impressed with what Acid did with this. It was kind of stale to me, and I thought there was so much potential here, and it kind of disappointed me. She had this weird approach to this character where she wanted to switch between this high-pitched talking voice and deeply pitched command voice, which I think was maybe a little funny the first or second time, but began to feel like a crutch the more she did it. Because instead of finding interesting things to say or places to take the improv, she just kept relying on that joke of giving commands. But to her credit, I think she did try some stuff, but her scene partner Cynthia just wasn't willing to play with her in the way that she wanted, like with the Taco Bell dog joke, for example, which Cynthia totally shut down and then turned into something weird about a chalupa and a burrito. But yeah, I wanted more layers, I wanted more interesting conversation, I just wanted this to do something, and it didn't. So I'm gonna give it a rat. And over the runway, let them eat cake! This is our Marie Antoinette look of the night, and honestly, Acid killed this look. It is incredible that she created this all out of paper, and she did something totally unique on the stage tonight. Nobody else did a paper wig but Acid Betty, and I love how it makes her extra tall, kind of looking like a chandelier on top of her head. Also, I find it fascinating she made the cuffs on the arm sleeves, and the embroidery details on the bust of this dress look so fabric-like, at least from a distance. And overall, this look is solid. My only critique really is that she said she was giving paper head to toe, but her shoes were just like the thigh-high leather, you know, pleaser type of boots, which I think were a little distracting because they were the only element of her look that wasn't paper. And I think an easy solution here would have just been to wear a white heel with some paper accessories like Alyssa Hunter did. I am still gonna give this look a hot. And next up it's Cynthia Lee Fontaine, who in the challenge is playing the character of Maria, the nervous chihuahua. And I've been talking a lot about how the queens in this challenge either did or did not bring interesting character layers into their improv, but Cynthia definitely takes the cake here in terms of interesting layers because she decides that her chihuahua dog is gonna have like a Catholic religious background. Cynthia's sense of humor is, I think, a really unique one that maybe wasn't totally captured by this improv challenge. Her double date with Acid in the park with Zane is probably the most uninteresting of the three, and she just kind of lingers on these comments about sticks and playing catch or whatever, and then she gives the confusingly angry response about the Taco Bell dog, and then they play with stuffed animals and it's over. Like, literally nothing happened, and the date went nowhere. It was odd. I didn't laugh at either of the queens in this date, and I just was really bored with it. So I'm gonna give it a rat. And over on the runway, let's not beat around the bushy. This look is probably the worst look we have seen on this season. Like, it is what it is, but at the same time, like, I kind of appreciated how bad it was because I had such a good laugh as I was watching her come out in this on the runway in my reaction video, which, by the way, you can watch exclusively on Patreon at patreon.com/BussyQueen. That's my members only website, and you can join and watch my reaction to every episode of Drag Race I review by clicking the link below. But let's be for real. Cynthia, what is this look? Is this supposed to be a Christmas tree? A cactus? Abstract piece of art? A cat toy? I don't know. I genuinely do not know. It's like a belt with origami paper balls attached to it and like a little collar lapel thing. There's no silhouette, or at least not a good one, and no real shape to this, and it's just really a random collection of green paper, which she said is green to celebrate her survival of liver cancer, which is great, but this look is a rot. Which brings us to our placements, and big surprise, we've got Ginger Minj in the top again for the third week in a row. But honestly, she totally deserved this placement, even more so than the past 2 weeks she was in the top, because she blew the other bitches out of the water in this improv thing. Like, they could not hold a candle to her, and she was just on a completely other level of talent. So congratulations to her. The other top placement goes to Daya Betty, which I think could have either been given to Daya or Denali, but it became pretty clear to me as they were giving the critiques to Denali that they just weren't interested in seeing her there, I guess because of the misinterpretations she had between the nervous and needy part of her character. But I will stand by that I actually think Denali should have been in the top with Ginger instead of Daya, because while Daya's performance was good, I just think Denali's was more interesting and unique. So Daya and Ginger lip sync to Mama Used to Say, and let me firstly say, I think Ginger is a great lip syncer. However, I think we have now seen the same style of lip sync from Ginger for the third week in a row. Like, she could be doing rap, disco, gospel, pop, and it is the same performance every single time. Like, she has a distinct style of park and bark with some really good facial emoting and definitely knows the lyrics every time, but we've been there, we've done that, we've seen it. And she didn't bring anything new to the table for this lip sync. I can't sit here and pretend that I'm excited to see her do the same thing every single week. And like, was she kind of tapping out here in this lip sync so that hopefully Daya Betty would win? I don't know, but I do hope that should she make it to the lip sync for the crown, she has some other tricks up her sleeve. Daya, though, did absolutely eat this lip sync up. She had so much energy and was jumping and dancing and gave a really unique performance both for her and between the two queens on the stage. And so Daya, rightly so, I think wins this lip sync, even though I kind of didn't want her to get the third point because of how desperate and crazy she had been to Alyssa, trying to get her MVQ point at every opportunity she had in this episode. And so this lip sync ends with the writing on the wall that Ginger Minj and Daya Betty will be progressing into the semifinals, but that third spot is still up for grabs. And we see a very emotional closing MVQ ceremony on the stage where Cynthia starts by giving her point to Alyssa, which, let's be honest, was kind of a throwaway point because Alyssa only had 1 point and it was clear Cynthia didn't want to risk her chances of getting to the top by maybe, let's say, giving her point to Denali. Denali then gives her MVQ point to Acid, which I will also call out as a throwaway to not risk her chances of not progressing. And then it finally gets interesting where we see Alyssa Hunter give her point to Denali, which has her in tears because Cynthia did give a point to Alyssa and she felt bad for not returning that favor there. And the final MVQ point of this ceremony is Acid's to award, which she decides to give to Cynthia in kind of the gag of this bracket, I think. Because this point is enough to send Cynthia into the semifinals over Denali. And so bracket 3 officially ends with Ginger Minj, Daya Betty, and Cynthia Lee Fontaine progressing into the semifinals. And personally, I'm a little sad that Denali did not take that third spot. I was definitely rooting for her here, I'm not gonna lie. And I do think she deserved the spot over Cynthia in terms of how the challenges progressed and how they did. But I do love an underdog story, and I do love Cynthia Lee Fontaine. She is a wonderful person, and I am ultimately happy to see her here progressing. But besides this one final gag, and I guess Daya Betty being completely insane about the MVQ point to Alyssa Hunter, this bracket kind of has been a disaster bracket, and I stand by that because it has largely been unentertaining, predictable, and lacking any sort of compelling storyline or tension between the competitors. And then there is, of course, the Ginger Minj issue in this bracket, which I do want to preface with saying Ginger Minj does not deserve any hate for being good at Drag Race or for being a production darling. She answered a call to be on a TV show that she wanted to participate in, and it's a TV show that she is damn good at, and the judges love her, and she deserves to progress into the next round. The bigger issue of Ginger being in this bracket, and maybe even the season as a whole though, is that I genuinely believe Ginger was miscast in All Stars 10, because this is, as we know, her 4th time around the block, where she has finished as a finalist in 2 of her 3 prior seasons. And here in this season, Ginger is up against queens who haven't been on Drag Race in a decade. Period. She's up against queens who are doing their first All-Stars run. She's up against early outs. And she's up against queens who are just newer to the craft of drag in general. And yes, her being so good at Drag Race compared with the other queens on this season and her being so favored by production has led to this bracket in particular feeling unentertaining and predictable. She's basically just been competing against herself for the past 3 weeks. And while I have argued that other queens could have taken her top spot in the prior 2 weeks, it's not like Ginger wasn't also doing amazing, because she was. But this, I think, is all compounded by the fact that fans truly love an underdog story, and Ginger is just not giving underdog story. Simply put, Ginger did not need to be cast on All Stars 10 because she didn't need a redemption. She did amazing on All Stars 6, and her competing here on All Stars 10 just kind of feels like an Olympic athlete doing a victory lap in the kiddie pool. But you know, those are just my silly thoughts, and I know this topic of favoritism in this season has been discussed to death in the fan base so far. And while Acid and Daya Betty both skirted the topic at a Roscoe's viewing party that we talked about last week, we did see Denali join a Roscoe's viewing party where she addressed the topic a little more plainly, saying this.
It is a formatted, biased competition show with a lot of subjective judging, and at the end of the day, it is literally woven into the fabric of Drag Race for it to favor certain individuals, certain people that are really good at the show, certain people that RuPaul really likes her humor vibes with. This fandom definitely thinks sometimes that things are just black and white. 2 things can exist at once. This show is built to favor people. Those people can also be really good at this show, okay?
And to end this section of the video, I thought it'd be fun to look at some data from IMDb where fans of the show can rate and review episodes of Drag Race. We can see that Bracket 1 currently has an IMDb average score of 8.37, Bracket 2 an average IMDb score of 7.8, and Bracket 3 an average score of just 4.7. And I will also put an asterisk by this data point and say this is not necessarily a stabilized score because there are so few reviews on episode 9 compared to the previous episodes, but I think it's plain to see that the fans are kind of thinking this was the worst of the 3 brackets. But of course, I'd love to know what y'all are thinking about all this down in the comments below. Are these IMDb scores fair? Do you think this 3rd bracket was a disaster? And I'm curious, how would you rate and rank the episodes of this season so far? And now for hottest hots on the runway, I'm gonna give it to Daya Betty, and in the challenge, I'm gonna give it to Ginger Minj. I also asked my patrons to vote on their hottest hots, and this week they've chosen Alyssa Betty on the runway and Ginger Minj in the challenge. And lastly, I want to give an extra special shout out to Kyanie, who's just joined my Patreon at the Bussy Queen Collector tier, and Ashton, Felicia, JBR, Laura, Matthew Burns, Nicole Minst, and Will and Tanner, who are all supporting me at my Bussy Queen Collector tier at patreon.com. See you later. Love ya. Bye.